I am a MESHMAN. I know. I can hear you all out there saying, "You're what?" Well, I tell you again. I am a MESHMAN. Let me explain. We MESHMEN and MESHWOMEN are a sect which goes back thousands of years. Our numbers are not great, but we have been around a long time. The question I am asked most often is, were you born with the mesh? Not quite. You see, when we are born, the doctor is there on a stool in the delivery room. He has the mesh ready like a catcher's mitt. And the baby, when it pops out, he catches the baby in the mesh. The mesh that I'm wearing right here is the standard size mesh. There have been a few deviations through the years which kind of are frowned upon, but this is pretty much the standard size mesh which we traditionally wear. Many times the entire body of the baby, when the doctor catches it, is enveloped by the mesh. But this is very important. The mesh never comes off. When we are caught with the mesh, when we are born ensnared with the mesh is there for good. It always stays. So we are practically born with the mesh. It is practically part of our DNA. It is forbidden for the mesh to ever come off without the express written consent of the High Council. The mesh is not even removed for diaper changing. No, that is not allowed. The mesh stays on. As you can imagine, that sometimes makes for a little bit of meshy poop, a sticky wicket, if you will, but it's a small price to pay to remain true to our faith. My father was a MESHMAN. My grandfather was a MESHMAN. My great-grandfather. Well, we do not talk about my great-grandfather very much. He shooed the mesh. Yes, I know that is hard for you to believe, but my great-grandfather, he shooed the mesh. He shooed the mesh and he was cast out. He was cast out to the loyal order of the mesh. Ah, but for every black sheep such as my great-grandfather, there is a MESHMAN whose devotion to the cause is so heroically inspiring, I tell you. Such is the tale of my Uncle Jim. Jim spread the gospel of the mesh far and wide. You might say that he practically had a messianic complex. He traveled all over the globe trying to win converts to the loyal order of the mesh. Once in a great while, he would succeed, but he never won over the mass of converts that he felt was out there waiting somewhere, waiting to be ensnared into the loyal order of the mesh. His most promising lead came when he was traveling through the Philippines. He wandered into a fishing village, and through hard work and sweat and determination and the sheer force of his will, he won over every single fisherman in that village to the loyal order of the mesh. Every single one of them. We back here at home, we conducted fund drives in order to pay for the vast quantities of mesh that we knew that those heretofore lost souls would need in order to construct their mesh hats. Uncle Jim, he made a triumphant return home. I tell you, there was joy in Meshville, joy in Meshville. All total, we sent 30,000 square yards of raw mesh to fashion into the mesh hats. We gave them the diagram for this hat. And do you know, damn it, we never heard from those Filipino fishermen again. To this day, we do not know what happened to all that mesh that we sent to those Filipino fishermen. Jim was crushed. They do not answer his calls. He is barred from entering the village. He is a broken man. But I guess every cause must have its martyrs. And Uncle Jim is the martyr of the MESHMAN. Changing the subject, I guess all of you out there are wondering how us mesh people make our living. Well, it hasn't been easy, let me tell you that. It has not been easy. I know it is hard to believe in this day and age, but employers have prejudices. Yes, prejudices against the followers of the loyal order of the mesh. Because of that, primarily we have two sources of income. One of them is working at McDonald's. That is because we do not mind wearing the hairnets. I mean, we are cooks at McDonald's. We come with our own hairnets, and we save McDonald's millions of dollars because of not having to furnish us hairnets. McDonald's loves us. And the other source of income we have is lawsuits. Yes, lawsuits. We people of the Mesh are a very creative people. We have made many contributions to society which you cannot even fathom. Not even fathom. Let me give you a few examples. Going back a long ways, and this may be too far for some of you younger people to remember, we wrote a screenplay called They Called Me Meshter Tibbs. Well, the studio ripped us off. They changed the name to They Call Me Mr. Tibbs and cast Sidney Poitier in the lead role. We had a bona fide Meshman in the lead role. They cast Sidney Poitier instead. It was Sidney Poitier to take the place of a real Meshman, I tell you. We also had an idea for a comedy team. We even shot our own pilot. At one point in the pilot, two Meshmen go into a renegade mesh hat store. Now keep in mind, anything other than the standard mesh, although there have been a few deviations, but anything other than standard mesh is frowned upon by the High Council. So the two men, they go into the renegade mesh hat store, and the place is busted by the mesh police while they were trying on these actually really good-looking mesh hats. And as they were being busted and carted away, one mesh man turns to the other and utters those now famous words, "Well, here's another fine mesh you've gotten me into." And of course the studio ripped it off and made a few little minor changes. And, well, thus was born the comedy team of Laurel and Hardy. Yes. I tell you, the Meshmen have never gotten credit for one of their creations. Not one! Spider-Man? Ha! That started off as Meshman. Isn't it obvious? Web. They just changed that to the, a spider web. Mesh web. Well, you can get the idea. That one is still in litigation. They just changed the mesh to a spider web. What an asinine idea that was. I tell you, it would have been 10 times as big if they'd have left it as Meshman. Jim Clochie's You Don't Mess Around with Jim. Ha! Give me a break. I think we all know what the title of that one originally was, now don't we? You should be able to get that. If you do not get that, you're a moron. Jim Croce? Ha! I spit on Jim Croce. His name is verboten in the mesh community. The courts are morons. Although we do occasionally pick up a small stipend here and there. Going back even further, we have had to combat those who would smite us down, steal our ideas, and belittle our accomplishments. 3,000 years. You do not know what I'm talking about, do you? Ha! It's no wonder. It's because of this vast anti-mesh conspiracy. 3,000 years is how old the oldest living Meshman was when he died. We called him Methuselah. Even that event was buried by the powers that be, and the name changed and tagged to one who lived not nearly so long. Perhaps our most common invention is one which has been used billions and billions of times, over and over and over, in slightly altered form, but it was our invention. Yes, I think you can guess it, maybe even. We invented meshed potatoes. I tell you, yes, meshed potatoes we invented. Meshed potatoes. Meshed potatoes. The only trouble is we're not quite sure who to sue on that one. At first we thought about suing Kentucky Fried Chicken, but we decided that they're meshed potatoes, and yes, we refused to call them mashed potatoes because they started off as our invention as meshed potatoes. The other people have only slightly altered them. They are our invention. Anyway, we decided against suing Kentucky Fried Chicken because their meshed potatoes is such a bastardization of the real thing that we did not want to be associated with our crappy mashed potatoes. We are now leaning towards suing a company called Ore-Ida. Okay, that is about it for this mini rant. I will leave you with this one parting thought. You non-believers of the mesh may think you have things all figured out, but you don't. Believe me, you don't. We meshmen see things differently than you do.
Oh,